The album was admittedly recorded in somewhat dire circumstances for Numan, facing a crushing debt and trying to create something for commercial success first and foremost. Unfortunately, his models for that success 80s Madonna, Jesus Jones, the Jam and Lewis production team, and others, not to mention mid-70s Bowie, Emotion being an obvious clone of Fame, had just been definitively shunted aside by the alternative G-funk explosion, rendering Machine Plus Soul an instantly outdated, flailing affair. Heard from a distance, one can detect those impulses that would definitively lead back toward a darker, more involving approach, especially in the lyrics. Playing more guitar than he had since his Tubeway Army days and pumping up the metallic rhythms that had animated his late 80s work, Numan forged a sound with striking similarities to the industrial clangor of artists like 9 Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson, who were just beginning their ascendance. But just as important in staking Numan's claim as a godfather to and contemporary of such bands was his new lyrical focus. While he'd once painted pictures of sci-fi's squalor, sacrifice, played up and even darker side, abandoning futuristic scenarios for horror stories straight out of Clive Barker, Deadliner and a relentless atheism that made this material his bleakest ever. The exception is You Walk in My Soul, a paean to his soon-to-be wife, Gemma O'Neill, that recalled the light touch of albums like Dance, a real gem. Stereo fantastic. Audio hi-fi lovers will like this. Several tracks push emotions up and you recall scenes and images from films of your own imagination. A must for any serious Numan fan. Well overlooked. A comeback album of sorts. Exile does the job of proving that Numan still has what it takes to remain relevant in the 90s alternative scene. But it's not exactly the magnificent return to form that Numan fanatics were expecting prior to its release. Since he is an originator, listen to 1979's replicas and 1980's The Pleasure Principle for the proof. It's hard to accept that Exile is so familiar sounding to his technoid contemporaries of the 90s. Still, it seems like ages since Numan has sounded so committed on record, as heard on the single Dominion Day. One has to give credit to an 80s new wave musician who can adapt and create contemporary sounding music. They're icons from that era who continue to release new recordings, Deepture Mode and The Cure, for example, but don't evolve musically. The sound isn't changing as if they were still back in the decade. This is not a bad thing, however. Core listeners are usually who buy these artists' newly released albums and they don't generate new fans. That said, hats off to 80s Britpop star Gary Numan, best known for the hit Cards, who offers up a modernized industrial goth set in Pure. The sprawling and dark Jagged finds Gary Numan continuing his love affair with all things gothic and industrial. And while many of the tracks are rich, layered, and downright creepy, the album as a whole is tough going, with too many songs sounding the same. The soft, loud, soft, even louder technique that 9 Inch Nails often employ is beaten to death here, and long, eerie intros are the norm. Numan's lyric writing is inspired, mostly by betrayal and heartbreak, and his teaming with multi-instrumentalist Dave Fenton has brought on a new sound for the veteran synth man, one with landscapes that are sinister and vast. Arguably his most cohesive and consistent effort since his early 80s heyday, of course. It's difficult to ignore the huge Trent Reznor-sized shadow that looms over the majority of its 12 tracks. With the bombastic synths, crunching riffs, and menacing vocals on the likes of When the Sky Bleeds, he will come and big noise transmission owing more than a nod to the industrial electro-metal of the Fragile. But neatly coming full circle, 9 Inch Nails' admittance of the influence Numan had on the career means the former Tubeway Army frontman has perhaps more right than anyone to borrow back a few ideas, especially when they are as convincing as the likes of opening track Resurrection, an unsettling and doom-laden ambient instrumental, which along with the brooding Deepture Mode-esque electro ballad Dead Sun Rising and the ghostly atmospherics of We Are the Lost would be perfectly suited to the end credits of a sci-fi horror movie.